Welcome back to the Drunk on Riding Stephen King dissection series, brought to you in part through the patronage of Ariya and Norinth. I really wish I could add another name to that. It gets so repetitive just saying his name over and over again. But today, we're continuing our deep dive into the 1982 novella collection, Different Seasons. Now, with the third section, the so-called Fall from Innocence, The Body. Before we get started, and I have a lot of thoughts on this story and its film adaptation, which we will talk more in depth on next time, let me just remind you that you can always get more videos more often over at drunkonriding.com, where just $1 will get you almost more than double the videos. And you can always listen to this as a podcast series as well. Just look for the Drunk on Riding dissections wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you can't find it, let me know and I'll make sure it gets there. Now, The Body. I have to tell you, so this is the second or third time that I'm reading this story, and I don't quite remember what it was like last time, but this time it took me a minute to really get into it. Not because the writing wasn't good or the story wasn't good, but because reading it just really made me want to watch the film adaptation, 1986's Stand By Me, a movie I really dig, and which is honestly an incredibly faithful adaptation when you look at the full body of Stephen King adaptations. So much so that while I was reading this, Richard Dreyfuss, who narrated the film as the adult Gordon LaChance, he'd come and go out of my head much like Morgan Freeman did back when I was reading Shawshank Redemption, even if their styles are wildly, wildly different. We'll talk more on that next time, like I said. Really, it wasn't until the train sequence, you know the one, that I overcame that, because it was at that point, long after the abundant character development, the shades of a memoir, and even the unforgettable junkyard sequence, that it was after all that I truly realized something. The novella and its adaptation, they're not so much two sides of the same coin. They complement each other. They build off each other. They tell the same story, have the same characters, the same sense of events, but they tell the same tale in just subtle different ways that to get the full experience, you have to experience both. You have to read the novella and watch the movie. Only then do you get the full scope of this story. I mean, they really both have very different strengths. They're almost symbiotic in a way. Now, we're going to dive into what makes the train sequence in the movie so special. And yes, it's a very special sequence full of a lot of backstage sort of drama. But the train sequence in the novella has its own special, unique properties to it. You kind of get the sense that this was a true event. This was a memory. This was something that happened and left something of a prominent scar on Stephen King. I mean, it had to have been for him to describe the fear, the gut-wrenching, just harrowing fear that Gordy goes through, that he experiences when he's up on that trestle and he reaches down and he feels the train coming. I mean, it's unlike anything I've really read before. And I mean, to be honest, reading it made me feel like I was the one up on that trestle. I was the one realizing that a train was coming at me. I was the one running for my life, sure as anything that I was about to get hit by a train, knocked off this thing to my hopefully death at that point, because if you live from that, it's not going to be happy life. But all of this really starts before the train even arrives, just as the four boys are getting ready to cross the bridge. Actually, as they're starting to cross the bridge, there's this truly notable shift in the writing. Just listen to this. I became acutely aware of all the noises inside me and outside me, like some crazy orchestra tuning up to play. The steady thump of my heart, the blood beat in my ears like a drum being played with brushes, the creak of sinews like the strings of a violin that has been tuned radically upward, the steady hiss of the river, the hot hum of a locust digging into tight bark, the monotonous cry of a chickadee, and somewhere, far away, a barking dog, Chopper maybe. The mildewy smell of the Castle River was strong in my nose. The long muscles in my thighs were trembling. I kept thinking how much safer it would be, probably faster as well, if I just got down on my hands and knees and scuttered along that way. But I couldn't do that. None of us would. If the Saturday matinee movies Down to the Gem had taught us anything, it was that only losers crawl. There's a lot going on in that short little quote, and I could sit here and just kind of praise the descriptors for hours, but that would be kind of boring. But what I would find most important in that section is the literal rite of passage here, right? Gordon and his friends, Chris, Vern, and Teddy, they're making this precarious crossing, right, in the midst of this epic journey, this crossing that if they had gone any other way wouldn't have been needed, wouldn't have been enjoyed. And there is something enjoyable about this kind of risking it, right? They're even before they know that the train is coming, they see this bridge and they're like, there is a possibility that we could face something here. And I mean, you get the literal sense of this is a rite of passage because it's a passage that you're crossing, but coming face to face with your mortality, as these kids do, is just, it puts it at a different level. As Stephen King himself put it in the Stand By Me retrospective documentary, Walking the Tracks, the summer of Stand By Me, there are certain rites of passage that all boys go through with their friends. The first time that we went away from home, the first time that we really had to face something frightening by ourselves, the first time that you face death, the first time that you face disillusion about your parents, the first time that you have to face a situation where you know if you don't back off a step, you're going to be hurt. These are all things that boys go through, and they're part of what makes boys men. But this train scene, it's just so beautifully detailed by King in this following passage that I could just sit here and recite it. I could recite the entire thing here and be happy that I did. I could go on and on. But I think for brevity, I'm just going to shorten it to this small section. I squatted and made a fist around the rail on my left. It thrummed in my hand. It was thrumming so hard that it was like gripping a bundle of deadly metallic snakes. You've heard it said his bowels turned to water? I know what that phrase means. Exactly what it means. It may be the most accurate cliche ever coined. I've been scared since, badly scared. But I've never been as scared as I was in that moment, holding that hot live rail. It seemed that for a moment all my works below throat level just went limp and lay there in an internal faint. A thin stream of urine ran listlessly down the inside of one thigh. My mouth opened. I didn't open it. It opened by itself, the jaw dropping like a trap door from which the hinge pins had suddenly been removed. My tongue was plastered suffocatingly against the roof of my mouth. All my muscles were locked. That was the worst. My works went limp, but my muscles were in a kind of dreadful lock bolt, and I couldn't move at all. It was only for a moment, but in the subjective time stream, it seemed forever. I've never been in a situation like this. Thankfully, I've fallen off of boats. I've fallen off a truck. I've gotten into fights. I've been threatened at a bar. I've been bit by a dog. I've gotten into a car accident. I've dealt with house fires. I've seen my share of dead bodies and gang-related activities. But this is a moment. This is truly a moment right here. This is a rite of passage through and through. And it's also a precursor of sorts, right? A precursor of what's to come when they find Ray Brower, the titular body, who perhaps confronted this exact same scenario, this exact same rite of passage, and failed. Didn't pass. As Stephen King writes, or maybe more poignantly, as Gordon LaChance writes, I think he was down here and relatively intact, because he was trying to get out of the way when the train hit him, knocking him head over heels. He had landed with his head pointed toward the tracks, arms over his head like a diver about to execute. He'd been knocked spang out of his keds. The train had knocked him out of his keds just as it had knocked the life out of his body. I skipped a part in that little passage where Stephen King or Gordon, whoever you want to actually say is writing this section, where he compares having an active imagination as a writer does, to sort of getting bitten by a cannibal. And it is very accurate and rather, I want to say poignant again. I just use that word, but that's what I'm going to go with. Given the very next section, which is probably one of the most dour things I've read in quite some time. The kid was dead. The kid wasn't sick. The kid wasn't sleeping. The kid wasn't going to get up in the morning anymore, get the runs from eating too many apples, or catch poison ivy, or wear out the eraser on the end of his Ticonderoga number 2 during a hard math test. The kid was dead. Stone dead. This continues for maybe another half a page or so. The kid will never do this. The kid is never going to do that. The kid blah, 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 blah. And I say it like that, but it's, I don't know what it is. Maybe, it's the times we're living in. Maybe it's my own personal experiences, but it got me. I mean, it got me hard. I was reading that and I just started tearing up. I was crying in this section, which is really interesting, given the kind of cold, detached way this exact same passage is delivered in the movie. It's delivered in such a way that I really got zero emotional response to it. Just listen to this.
The kid wasn't sick. The kid wasn't sleeping. The kid was dead.
Though perhaps it was this closer from the novella, which is not included in the movie, that really got me. He was a boy our age. He was dead. And I rejected the idea that anything about it could be natural. I pushed it away with horror, as any civilized society would, right? I'm going to cut myself off there. I'm not going to go on another diatribe. If you've been watching this series since the beginning, you know my politics, and we don't have to go into it anymore. Now, I mentioned earlier that this novella serves as something of a memoir, and this right here, this train sequence, is a perfect example of that. No, not the fictional memoir, though this sort of plays into this, and as do the many writing excerpts. Many is kind of probably overstating. I think there are 2 writing excerpts, and those and the narrative cutaways that really serve to inspire Dreyfuss's narrative within the film. They're certainly part of the memoir, more the fictional memoir, but what I want to talk about is something else, because I think maybe the body is a bit more nonfiction than you might realize. I almost talked about this back when we did the video on Danse Macabre, but I saved it particularly for this video. One, because it's a bit long, and that video had already gone on a bit much, but 2, because it serves the story of the body oh so well. Back in Danse Macabre, Stephen King shared this anecdote, which I believe he mentioned he first told people about this at a writer's forum. This is what he said. I had gone off to play at a neighbor's house, a house that was near a railroad line. About an hour after I left, I came back, as white as a ghost. I would not speak for the rest of the day. I would not tell my mom why I had not waited to be picked up, or phone that I wanted to come home. I would not tell her why my chum's mom hadn't walked me back but had allowed me to come alone. It turned out that the kid I had been playing with had been run over by a freight train while playing on or crossing the tracks. Years later, my mother told me they had picked up the pieces in a wicker basket. My mom never knew if I had been near him when it happened, if it had occurred before I even arrived, or if I had wandered away after it happened. Perhaps she had her own ideas on the subject, but I have no memory of the incident at all, only of having been told about it some years after the fact. Interestingly, someone in the audience, when he delivered that anecdote to the forum suggested that was why he went into horror, why he writes what he does. And as you may recall from that video, King offers a something of a different origin, something more book related. But there are a number of other anecdotes that really play into the book here, including King's memories of a childhood hangout in a dusty loft, a milk money theft, and even an incident involving leeches, or bloodsuckers, as he put it. Of course, it's not uncommon for childhood memories, even adult memories, to make it into our writing. Whether fictionalized or not, or vaguely fictionalized sometimes. But specific scenarios aside, sometimes just the shape of our lives color our writing or color our experiences when reading something. Now, while reading The Body, there was one particular instance of anecdotes. It was a series of anecdotes that kind of all detailed an experience Gordon had, or imagined he had, or a dream that he had, wherein friends and family were drowning in this lake, and he could see them drowning beneath him, and they started to grab him by the ankles and pull him down. And this is repeated a few times throughout the novella, and every single time that came up, it really it really spoke to me. Now, I'm not going to share all of them, but there is this one final quote here that I'm going to share that I feel really serves as something of a cap to the entire concept. Friends come in and out of your life like busboys in a restaurant. Did you ever notice that? But when I think of that dream, the corpses under the water pulling implacably at my legs, it seems right that it should be that way. Some people drown, that's all. It's not fair, but it happens. Some people drown. I think I've talked about my childhood on here a few times, but given the story of The Body, it seems kind of fitting that I share another little bit of background trivia. I grew up in Bridgeport, Connecticut, as a butt of many a joke, even though I've never been one to actually understand the punchline. But I left. I got out. I don't live there anymore. Most of my friends left as well. But to this day, I vividly remember this conversation I had with a friend who didn't get out. I had this was while I was in college, and I had gone home. I don't know if it was for winter break or summer break or one of those. And she was working in, I believe it was Filene's at the time. I think they're still in business. And I bumped into her, and I was talking to her, and I found out that she didn't go to college as I had assumed she did, because she was shy of something like $1,000 and couldn't afford to go to school. So she was working away, trying to save up, trying to do something more. And I remember looking at her and being impressed with her, because I knew that she could do it. She could do whatever she really wanted to set her mind on. But also that I could have given her that money. That's what I was thinking. I was looking at her thinking, like, I could have lent that to you. I could have given you that. You could have gotten out. And it wasn't a lot of money. I was working summers. I had savings. I could build that up quickly enough. And nowadays it's like nothing, right? But at that time, I remember thinking to myself, something as small as that, just not being able to save enough, completely altered the course of her life. Now, don't get me wrong. Things worked out for her. She's in a great position. She's extremely happy the last I spoke with her, and her life has turned out great. Very, very different than I think what she had originally intended, but is great and she's happy. But the fact that it struck me, even then, even young as I was, I had gotten lucky. I had gotten out. I had escaped. I did not let anyone drag me down, drag me back, keep me there. I had friends from high school who, because of gang activity, because of drugs, because of gun violence, what have you, didn't make it Some didn't make it out of high school. Others barely made it past high school. But like Stephen King, like Gordon LeChance here, I moved on, and I didn't let anything drag me back. Getting emotional talking about this, but this concept, while a prominent theme in the body in the novella, would interestingly actually come into play with some real life politics surrounding the story. You might have noticed, if you pay any attention to the title page at all, that the novella is dedicated to one George McLeod. Who is George McLeod? Well, Stephen King's college roommate, and according to the unofficial King biography Haunted Heart by Lisa Rogach, possibly at least partial inspiration for the story of the body, as recounted in that book. One day back in college at the apartment on North Main Street in Orono, Steve asked what McLeod was working on, and he told him the plot and details of a short story based on an incident from his own childhood. He and a few of his friends had heard of a dead body near the railroad tracks, and they went off to find it. Though he described the story in great detail and knew exactly how it would end, he never finished writing it. He stole it from me, said McLeod. I recognized this story as being literature, and Steve recognized it too, though not on a conscious level. He later told me he had borrowed my story to write his. All of those anecdotes were lifted right out of my story, and essentially the difference is that he had a dead body in his, and I had a dead dog in mine. Other than that, they were pretty much the same. Reportedly, when Stand By Me came out, McLeod actually asked King for his name to be on the movie and for a cut of the profits, both of which Stephen King refused, and that was the end of their relationship. That was the end of their friendship, which I can kind of understand. I could see ending a friendship on that one. However, in that same book, McLeod doesn't really even truly blame Stephen King. If he's near something, he will absorb it like a sponge, said McLeod. He's Velcro when it comes to popular culture. He picks it all up. It's his strength, and naturally, it's his weakness, too. But plagiarized, borrowed, adapted, however you want to put it, maybe it was just exactly what Stephen King needed to help that seed germinating in his brain grow and bloom and blossom into the novella that we have today. As King noted in that Stand By Me retrospective I mentioned earlier, for a long time I thought I would love to be able to find a string to put on a lot of the childhood experiences that I remember. A lot of them were funny and some of them were kind of sad. The people I'd known and some of the boys that I hung out with that really weren't headed anywhere except down blind alleys. And nothing came and nothing came. And what you do when nothing comes is, you don't push. You just put it aside. And there came a day when I thought to myself, if these guys go somewhere, if there's a reason for them to go somewhere and do something, what could it be? I came up with the idea of them going down the train tracks to look for the body of a kid that I made up. A situation whereby they would know the body was there and they can go and find it. And everything else follows from that. I always love these sort of behind the scenes looks at an author's, any author's really, writing process. You know, that whole kind of where do you get your ideas? And if you do too, I really highly recommend you check out the documentary, which is at least an extra on my special edition DVD version of the film. It's probably on the Blu-ray. It's probably wherever you can find it. It's probably on YouTube. I mean, we're in the age of the internet, so it's probably anywhere. But in the same vein, what I find particularly great about the body are those maybe autobiographical shades of a memoir that you get peppered throughout the story, which, unless I missed something, aren't really reflected in the movies so well. I mean, I don't think that writing is even brought up in the film until about halfway through the movie, so it's like, that's obviously not the narrative's focus, whereas in the novella, we get a few excerpts from books, we get a bunch of asides about like the publishing process, about his writing process, about how he started writing, where he went with the writing, where he's writing now. And I can't help but wonder, you know, how much of this is real. There's this particular quote I happen to love, and I kept thinking, like, which novel was he thinking about while writing this? It definitely seems like it's Carrie, though perhaps through a Gordon LeChance lens. It is the work of a young man every bit as insecure as he was inexperienced. And yet it was the first story I ever wrote that felt like my story. The first one that really felt whole after 5 years of trying. The first one that might still be able to stand up even with its props taken away. Ugly but alive. Even now when I read it, stifling a smile at its pseudo-toughness and its pretensions, I can see the true face of Gordon LeChance lurking just behind the lines of print. A Gordon LeChance younger than the one living and writing now. One certainly more idealistic than the best-selling novelist who is more apt to have his paperback contracts reviewed than his books, but not so young as the one who went with his friends that day to see the body of a dead kid named Ray Brower. A Gordon LeChance halfway along in the process of losing the shine. I mean, this has to be about Carrie, right? I mean, just the first 5 years, those are like the Richard Bachman years, right? Those novels that were never published until later on. And given when the body was written, it was written right after King finished Salem's Lot. He had to be reflecting on Carrie. It was his only big success at that point. And I think, it has to be, especially when you look at this other quote that he throws in there, which is supposed to be when Gordy goes to New York following his first big breakout novel. And he's there and he's drunk and he thinks to himself, the only reason anyone writes stories is so they can understand the past and get ready for some future mortality. I mean, it's a bit dark, but again, Carrie was about high school, and I mean, do we ever stop reflecting on high school? But oh ho! What was that in that last quote? Did I say the shine? Did Stephen King just give us yet another way for us to analyze and look at his third published novel? Of course, that one also starred a writer and also seemed rather autobiographical, at least in its handling of alcoholism, as you might remember. Salem's Lot starred a writer as well, and both are referenced within the body, as are Rita Hayworth and Shawshank Redemption, Cujo, and Night Shift. And that's all besides the fact that the story is based in Castle Rock, which also ties it back to the Dead Zone, as well as a number of future books. It was also what inspired the production company behind the Stand By Me adaptation, Castle Rock Entertainment, as well as a currently rather popular homage series we'll touch on in the future. Back to the memoirish quotes, though, before we kind of wrap this up. King also gives some rather colorful commentary on what it's truly like to be a writer. The act of writing itself is done in secret, like masturbation. For me, it always wants to be sex and always falls short. It's always that adolescent handjob in the bathroom with the door locked, which he follows up a bit later with, nowadays, writing is my work and the pleasure has diminished a little. And more often, that guilty masturbatory pleasure has become associated in my head with the coldly clinical images of artificial insemination. I come according to the rules and regs laid down in my publishing contract. And that's not even to mention the beginning of the book's final chapter. I'm a writer now, like I said. A lot of critics think what I write is shit. Pretty brutally honest there, no? And maybe a bit prescient, no? Just a little bit? But it's also not the only part of the story that really seems to be reflective of King's later career. But that I think we'll leave for next time. For now, let's end this portion of the dissection here with just a friendly reminder that if you would like more videos more often, more episodes more often, head on over to drunkonwriting.com and sign up. Or just, if you're hanging out in the free feeds, that's fine. I would just appreciate it if you gave this video a thumbs up, leave a comment below, share it with your friends, do all the fun little doodads that you like to do. Whatever you like. You can even give me a thumbs down and say this video sucks if you really truly feel like that. All the feedback helps make a better product in the end. So, until next time, cheers and keep on writing.